Welcome in, everybody. Get ready for a deep dive today. We're going to talk about Caravaggio.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you might think you know him. You know those super dramatic paintings, but there's a whole lot more to the story. And we've got some incredible sources that'll lay it all out. We're going to go beyond the art and really get to know the man himself. The good, the bad, and let's just say it, the downright fascinating stuff. And to guide us through all of this, we've got our expert, who is amazing at connecting the dots and giving us that bigger picture. So to kick things off, when you hear the name Caravaggio, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
You know, I think it's easy to just jump right to that light and shadow stuff, the chiaroscuro, but I think to really get Caravaggio, you got to get the man.
Yeah.
We got to understand who was holding the brush. You know, he started out as Michelangelo Merisi, born in 1571 in Milan in his early life. It was full of tragedy. Imagine losing your father and grandparents to the plague. When you're only 5 years old, that's got to leave a mark.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to wonder how something like that shapes you.
Yeah.
How an experience like that, with loss and darkness so young, influences the art you make later on. The sources mention that he eventually became known as Caravaggio.
Yeah, Caravaggio.
And his work, it's definitely not your typical Renaissance style.
Oh, no.
He used live models, which wasn't totally unheard of. But here's the thing. He used everyday people for his paintings. Beggars, laborers, even sex workers to portray biblical figures and mythological scenes. Why do you think he made that choice? What was he going for there?
Well, think about it. This was a huge statement back then in the Renaissance.
Yeah.
Everybody was obsessed with this idealized beauty.
Yeah.
Especially when it came to religious and historical figures. They were always portrayed as perfect beings. But Caravaggio, he comes in and shows the real gritty human side of these figures. You can imagine what kind of shockwaves that sent through the art world.
Oh, yeah.
It makes you think about how society viewed things like the sacred and the profane.
Okay.
And how art either reflected or challenged those perceptions. It's pretty deep stuff.
It really is. It really makes you stop and consider what he was trying to say with those choices.
Exactly.
He wasn't just interested in painting a pretty picture, was he?
Not at all.
He was making a statement. And then there's the word you mentioned earlier, chiaroscuro.
Oh, yeah.
I'll be honest, I've always found that term a little intimidating.
I get it.
Could you break it down for us? You know, in a way that anyone can understand.
Sure. I think we can demystify that a little.
Thanks.
So in the hands of Caravaggio, chiaroscuro, it becomes more than just a fancy art term. It's a storytelling tool, a powerful one.
Okay.
He uses it to create drama and pull you right into the scene.
Yeah.
And a great example of this is his painting of the Calling of St. Matthew. You've got Matthew at a table with his buddies, when all of a sudden, bam, this beam of light cuts through the darkness and illuminates Matthew and Jesus.
I've always wanted to see that one in person.
Oh, you should. It's amazing.
I can only imagine how powerful it must be to actually stand in front of that painting and feel the light.
Oh, it's incredible.
You know, almost physically drawing you into the story.
That's the genius of it. He's not just playing with lighting.
Right.
He's using light and shadow to make you feel something, to highlight symbols, to guide your eye through the story. It's almost like he's directing a play, but on a canvas.
I like that. Directing a play on a canvas. And speaking of drama, our sources make it very clear that this guy's personal life was just as dramatic as his paintings. He had a bit of a fiery personality, shall we say.
You could say that again?
There's even a story that's become known as the artichoke incident.
Oh, yeah, the artichoke incident.
He got into a brawl with a waiter.
Can you believe it?
In Rome over how artichokes were prepared.
What? I mean, can you imagine?
It's a classic Caravaggio story.
It really is, and it shows you just how passionate he was.
And volatile.
But unfortunately, that intensity didn't always play out in funny little stories.
Right.
It led to a much more serious incident in 1606. According to the records, he killed a man during a brawl?
Yeah.
It seems like it was probably a matter of honor back then, but still this event forced him to flee Rome.
Wow.
And live in exile for the rest of his life.
So he's on the run, he's looking over his shoulder constantly.
Yeah.
But he's still creating art. And in fact, some people say that his most powerful and emotionally raw work came from this period of his life.
That's fascinating. So even with all that turmoil, even in exile, his creative fire was still burning.
Absolutely.
Did his style change noticeably during this time?
Oh yeah, big time. You see a definite shift. His palette gets darker, and the emotions are way more raw. Like Salome with the head of John the Baptist.
Okay.
The way he paints Salome, her face is just this mask of indifference.
Holding the severed head like it's nothing.
Wow.
It's chilling. It's powerful stuff.
It's like you can really feel what he was going through during those years in exile.
Yeah.
Maybe processing his own guilt,
Right.
his own mortality through his art. It's almost like he's using these biblical stories to grapple with his own inner demons.
That's a great point. And it really speaks to the psychological depth of his work. He wasn't just illustrating Bible stories.
Right.
He was exploring these complex human emotions through them.
Okay.
Guilt, despair, the search for redemption.
And that's why it still resonates with us today.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about that chiaroscuro technique.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's so influential. You can see it everywhere.
Like where? Give me an example.
Okay, think about film.
Okay.
Especially film noir.
Right. With all the shadows.
Exactly. Those stark contrasts, those shadowy figures.
Yeah.
That's chiaroscuro. And even in photography, you see artists playing with light and shadow to create these dramatic effects, just like Caravaggio.
Wow, so he's like the godfather of dramatic lighting.
Pretty much.
In visual media. That's incredible. But here's something I find really interesting. Our sources mentioned that after he died, his fame kind of fizzled out.
Really?
Yeah.
Yep.
It wasn't until the 20th century that he was really rediscovered.
Huh, that's wild.
I know. Why do you think that happened? Why did he fall into obscurity for a while?
Well, art tastes change over time.
Yeah.
Right? What's considered groundbreaking in one era might be out of fashion in another.
Right.
So after the Baroque period, things shifted towards a more restrained style.
Okay.
More classical.
Uh-huh.
And I think Caravaggio's work with all that raw realism and emotional intensity, it might have just been a little too much for people back then.
So he was ahead of his time.
Exactly. Too edgy for the 18th century, but perfect for the 20th.
I love that. And I think that's part of what makes him so fascinating. He was a rebel, an innovator. He wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo and push those boundaries. So it's no surprise that eventually people recognized his genius.
Yeah, he definitely left his mark on art history.
Speaking of leaving a mark,
okay,
are there any paintings that you think really capture the essence of his style and his impact?
Ooh. There are so many good ones.
I know, but if you had to pick a few.
Okay, well, I'd say The Calling of St. Matthew is an absolute must-see.
Yeah, that one's definitely at the top of my list, too.
It's just a perfect example of his chiaroscuro and his ability to capture a moment.
Yeah.
To freeze time in this super dramatic way.
You mentioned you've seen that one in person, right? What was it like to experience that firsthand?
It was breathtaking, honestly. Just the way the light hits Matthew's face.
Yeah.
It's like the painting itself is glowing. You're pulled right in.
Wow.
You feel like you're right there in that sacred moment.
Another one our sources highlight is The Supper at Emmaus.
Oh, yeah. That one's incredible, too.
What is it about that one that stands out to you?
Well, for me, it's all about the emotion.
Okay.
The way he captures the disciples' astonishment when they realize it's the resurrected Christ.
Right.
It's masterful. The gestures, the facial expressions.
Yeah, you can practically feel their shock and disbelief coming off the canvas.
Exactly. Oh, and then there's David with the head of Goliath.
Okay.
Now, that one's a little haunting.
Oh, how so?
Well, he painted it in exile.
Right.
And some scholars believe that he used his own face for Goliath's severed head.
No way. That's chilling.
Right. It adds a whole other layer of meaning.
Yeah, it's like he's confronting his own demons in that painting.
It's amazing how much depth and meaning he was able to pack into his work.
So for someone who's just starting to explore Caravaggio, where would you recommend they begin? What's a good entry point?
Well, I think those paintings we just talked about are great places to start.
Okay.
The Calling of St. Matthew, The Supper at Emmaus.
Yeah.
Those are classic Caravaggios. And if you ever have the chance to see one in person, definitely do it.
Why? What's so special about seeing them in person?
It's just a completely different experience.
Okay.
The way the light plays on the canvas, the textures, the brushstrokes.
Right.
You just get a whole new level of appreciation for his skill.
It's like you step into the painting.
Exactly.
All right, so we've talked about his life, his technique, his impact.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what do you think is the biggest misconception people have about Caravaggio?
That's a good question. I think sometimes people get so caught up in the drama.
Yeah.
The brawls, the exile, the mysterious death.
Right.
That they miss the nuance of his work. They see him as this wild, unpredictable figure.
Yeah.
And while that's partly true, it's only one side of the story.
Okay.
He was also incredibly intelligent, sensitive, and deeply spiritual.
So it's like people are reading the tabloid headlines instead of the actual article.
Right. There's so much more to Caravaggio than this sensationalized version of his life.
Okay.
He was a true visionary, a master who pushed the boundaries of art and left a legacy that still inspires us today.
What do you think is at the heart of that legacy? Why does Caravaggio's work still resonate with us after all these centuries?
Because he captures something essential about the human experience.
Okay, what do you mean?
His paintings are about our shared struggles, our joys, our sorrows, our hopes and fears.
So it's not just about pretty pictures.
Oh.
It's about connecting with something deeper.
Exactly. And he does it with such honesty and vulnerability that it's impossible not to be moved.
You know, it's funny you say that because I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
He shows us the beauty in the ordinary.
Yes.
The divine in the everyday.
And that's a powerful message.
It is. It reminds us that we're all flawed. Right. We all make mistakes. But there's still beauty and meaning to be found, even in our imperfect lives.
He makes us want to look closer, to see the world with fresh eyes.
And to appreciate both the light and the darkness.
Beautifully said.
It makes you want to go out and explore art, you know?
I know exactly what you mean.
See things with new eyes.
And that's what makes studying art so exciting, right?
Yeah, there's always something new to learn.
Always something new to discover.
Even with artists we think we know.
Like Caravaggio.
Like Caravaggio, exactly.
There's always more to uncover.
More layers to peel back.
He can still surprise us.
Absolutely. So what's your big takeaway from today? What do you want our listeners to remember about Caravaggio?
I think it's important to remember that he was more than just a skilled painter.
Okay.
He was a visionary, a revolutionary who changed the game, and a really complex person whose life and work still have so much to teach us.
His paintings, they're not just pretty pictures.
No, they're not.
They're windows into the human experience.
And invitations to think and feel and question.
They're stories waiting to be told, emotions waiting to be felt.
And they remind us that even when things are dark, there's always beauty to be found.
There's always light to be sought.
Beautifully said.
So next time you see a Caravaggio, whether it's in a museum or a book or even online, take a moment to really look at it.
Take it all in.
See the details.
Those emotions.
Let yourself get drawn into the story.
You never know what you might discover.
And hey, maybe you'll even be inspired to go create something beautiful yourself.
I love that.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of Caravaggio.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed the journey as much as we did.
And that you learned something new.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.